The very first step is to take a foam board, like this one here, and cut it so that it is 64.5 centimeters long by 27.8 centimeters wide. And to do that, we're going to use a craft knife. The next step is to make beams. We're going to need 8 of them, and to do that you're going to need 4 sheets of this, and because each sheet will make 2 beams. Alright, to make the beams you're going to need a ballpoint pen, a pair of scissors, ruler, tape, and some magazine to place under your paper. First step is to trace along these thick dotted lines. You also need to trace along the thin dotted line at one end. We're going to use the end that has a little bit of writing on it. It says beam and cut to length desired. I'm going to line it up with this very thin dotted line and trace along there as well. Next I'm going to cut this in half, and this, like I said, will make 2 beams. We'll put one aside for now. I'm going to make mountain folds on each of these thick dotted lines. So I'm going to fold it like this. I call it mountain fold because when you're looking at the side that's printed, it makes like a mountain. So you're folding back, if you want to say that as well. So I fold, and I unfold, do the next one, fold. I should have 4 folds altogether in that direction. I bring it around like this so that the 2 end panels will be overlapping each other, and that will make a square. Now you do not want to try to hold it in the air while you're taping it. The best way to do it is to push it down. So you take two flaps from one side towards the other side, and then 1 flap from this side, and then you'll have a seam running right down the middle here. And you're going to put tape along that seam. I put one big piece in the middle, and I put another one, making sure that it goes over the end like this. And then I'm going to push that on the inside. I don't want to make it into a square, it's going to be hard, so it's kind of a diamond shape right here. And I push it like that and pinch it on the inside. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I will make it as strong as possible. I have some of the tape sticking out over the end, about a centimeter or so. I hold it open just enough so I can bend it around just like that. I left a little gap there, so I'm going to fill that in. There is tape all along this edge. Alright, next step I'm going to cut along the thick dotted lines, but only as far as this line that I traced earlier. And these flaps will bend back, and these will be used to attach it to the board. There's 4 of them like that, and this will sit flat like that. You'll need 8 of these. Once you have 8 columns ready to go, I'm going to put 7 of them aside, and I'm going to start attaching them to the board. And you need to decide which side of the board you're going to attach to, this side or the opposite side. And you want to see which side it'll sit flatter. When I put it this direction, this corner and a couple other corners, they kind of lift up off the table. So I want to make sure not to attach it like this. I want to flip it like this so the corners are level and it's less likely to rock back and forth as the marble is going through the track. So I'm going to start by attaching one to this corner right here. So you'll put beams in each corner. So right now it doesn't really matter which corner you start in, because they're going to go, these columns are going to attach in each corner. I'm going to attach it so that this edge of the flap is right along this edge of the board, and this edge of this flap is along this edge of the board. So I'm going to move it around till it's just lined up, like so. I'm going to hold it still. I'm going to put tape along this flap. I want to put it as close to the beam, the vertical part of this column as possible. It's labeled beam, but these are actually going to be used as columns for now, which is why I keep messing up that. I put tape along this flap as well, and then the other 2 flaps here. You can attach these in each of the 4 corners of the board. Okay, you should have 4 columns attached to the 4 corners. each one right up against the corner. Next step, I'm going to have you number each of these columns so that when I talk about a specific spot, it'll be easy to tell which corner I'm talking about. So I'm going to start at one end here. I'm just going to number one on the left, number 1, one on the right, number 2. I'm going to turn around, do the one on the left, it's number 3, and one on the right is number 4. Next we need to figure out exactly where the last 4 columns are going to go. And I'm going to measure off from column number 1, I'm going to measure off to the left. And I'm going to measure, if you want to use the, if you want to use one of these beams or to measure, what you can do is measure from this first line, not from the end, but from the first line, and put it against, right lined up with this inner edge of this one. And then put a mark where the last line is, not the end of the paper, but the last line is, and that will show you where the inside of the next column is going to go. That way, when this is attached, when we have one of these attached, it will wrap around each one. And if you want to double check that distance, it's 23.1 centimeters. So if you just want to measure 23.1 centimeters, that's another way to do it. And you can put a line here, and that will show me where to attach this first column, this next column. This is going to be lined up with this edge of this flap, and this flap is also going to be right up against this edge of the board, so I can put it right there. So if you want to extend the line, so that line is going to be, if you want to measure it from the inside of this flap, the inside of this flap, that will be, like I said, 23.1 centimeters. Line it up, make sure that it is a square, that it's not squished one way or the other. Like that. And then tape down all 4 flaps. I'm going to turn around and do the same thing, going from column number 2 and then measuring to the right. Again, 23.1 centimeters. The next column is going to be measured from column 4 to the right. I'm going to measure 20.7 centimeters. From the right edge of this flap going that way, 20.7. That's going to show where the left edge of this flap is going to be. So this distance is going to put these 2 columns fairly close to each other. Do the same thing measuring from column 3 off to the left, 20.7 centimeters. You can double check your work. You should have about 7 centimeters between these 2 columns right here. Alright, next we're going to make 2 more columns. These ones are going to be a little bit different than the previous ones. We're going to start off by trimming the end off here where it says beam right at the top here. I'll go ahead and trim off one of these square widths. And this is going to be, this will make it so that it will not go over the maximum height allowed on Science Olympiad competitions. We're going to add this to the top of 2 of those columns. And so I'm going to trace along this dotted line here, and each of the dotted lines, just the same as before. You do not need to trace along any of these other lines going the other direction. I'm going to cut it in half, so 2 of these columns. And I'm going to fold it back, same as before. And the other thing we're going to need to do with these is to cut up one end. I'm going to do it from the end that does not have the writing on it. So this end, and it still says cut to length desired. I'm going to go to the other end. I'm going to cut along each edge up to that first line. And do 2 of these just like that. Okay, I'm going to take one of these columns that I just made, and you should have 4 flaps at the end. I did not trace along here. You don't need to bend these at all. You're just going to bend them a little bit actually, so that 2 of them will fit inside of this column. This is column number 1, so do column number 1. I'm going to pinch these two together. I'm going to squeeze them on the inside and wiggle that on so that two flaps will stay on the outside and two go on the inside. And then I'm going to look down from the top and make sure that it's straight. I don't want it bent this way or this way. And once it's straight, I'm going to put tape all the way around the outside of this. So I'm looking down from the top, making sure that it looks like a straight line along each edge. And I'll do the same thing to column 2 over here. At this point, your structure should look like this, where there's 2 extra tall columns and then there's 6 shorter columns. And columns number 1 and 2 should be the 2 tall ones. Next we're going to work on some of the beams that will go between all the other columns that we've made so far. And because the board is going to be so narrow, we're not going to be able to use full lengths of these. So we're going to go ahead and cut off, I'm going to cut off the bottom 2 square lengths of this. So what I mean by that is, don't cut on the first line, but on the second line. You can go ahead and cut off those on 3 sheets, because we're going to need 6 beams of this length. I'm going to trace along the dotted lines. If you want to do all 6 of them right now, you can. Next step is cut down the middle, so you should end up with 6 shortened beams. One of these is going to be different from the other 5, so we're going to go ahead and do that one first. And we're going to trace along this line at each end, but only in this middle section right here. So I'm only going to trace from here to here. So line it up, trace from here to here, turn around, do the same thing at the other end. Tape it all together, fold it and tape it together the same way you did before. I'm going to cut along these edges only up to this line that I drew, and you only need to do it along these 2 edges here. I do not need to cut along these edges. So I cut to here and here, and this flap should fold back easily. Do the same thing on this end. It should look like that. This beam will fit over the top of the 2 tall columns you've done so far in columns 1 and 2. And by taking one flap, you put it on the inside, and then you fit these flaps around the outside, left and right, of columns 1 and 2. So I have a flap on the inside, and I have these flaps, these corners will go around the outside. Do the same thing on both sides. Try to push it all together from the sides so that it's not still sticking out like that. I'm going to put tape around basically everywhere that you can get to. So around this flap here, and these side flaps, and then over the top as well. Do that for both ends. Before you go any further, you might want to just double check the height of your roller coaster. Make sure that it's not over the maximum of 50 centimeters tall. The other 5 of these are all going to be made the same way. And I'm going to trace along the last line on each end. You really only need to do the 2nd and 4th boxes, so not the middle one. Those 2 like that. Turn around the other side. Do 1, 2. Like that. Fold and tape, same as usual. Alright, this time you're going to have to cut along each of these edges. Cut as far as the lines that you traced. Fold the flaps that have been traced back like this. So you'll have 2 that are folded on each end and 2 that are not. And these have to be the same size. So, meaning that if I hold it like this, the flaps all point up and down on both ends. And you can go ahead and do 5 of these just like this. Before we attach any more beams, let's number the last of these columns. So over here is column number 3. So between column 3 and column 2 over in this corner, let's call those 5 and 6. I'm going to turn it around. So now I have column 1 over here on my right, column 4 over here on the left. Let's call those 7 here and 8. I'm going to take one of these beams and attach it between columns 5 and 8. And I need to do it at the correct height. It's not going to go at the very top or at the very bottom. We should count up 5 of these squares. Go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that is the height that I want it at. I want that on both sides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to hold it so the flaps that are bent are facing up and down. And I'm going to go between columns 5 and 8. I'm going to put it at that height that I picked out before, the 5th square. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. I'm going to push the beam so it's right up against this column. Now I'm going to tape it in place, and you're going to need 4 pieces of tape. 1 down this way, 1 over here, 1 across this piece, and 1 across here, and you do the same thing on the other side. So a total of 8 pieces of tape. I'm going to turn it around so you can see a little better. Okay, I'm going to put another one between 6 and 7 at the exact same height. So I can, if you'd like, you can mark the 5th square. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's going to go across. Okay, we're going to take 2 more of these beams that we've prepared with the flaps pointing up on both ends. And I'm going to attach one between columns 3 and 4. This one's going to be at the 3rd square height. So count up 1, 2, 3. Square here and there. You're also going to attach 1 more of these beams between columns 6 and 7 at the same level as this one here. So 3 squares above the bottom. So if you want to count up 3 squares. This one can be a little tricky to put in because it's so close to the other one. But there should be 1 square in between as far as height goes, so it will be somewhere. You might need to bend this flap back. In fact, it would have been probably easy to put this one in first, but either way, it should look like that. So tape that in place right there. Alright, you should have 1 of these beams remaining, and we're going to put this one aside for now. We'll come back and use that later. For now, I want you to take another sheet of beams, trace the thick dotted lines, and fold as usual. Alright, next we're going to trace along the thin dotted lines, but not every one. It's going to be just like the last time on one end. You're going to trace along the 2nd and the 4th one, and then the same over here, the 2nd and the 4th from the side. So you will skip the end ones, and then do 1, skip, 1, skip. At the other end, you're only going to do the ones, the 2nd from each end. So I'm going to do this one here, I'm going to slide over to here, and do this one right here. Tape it together as usual. Alright, at one end, you're going to have those two lines opposite each other. And on that end, you're going to cut down all four sides, all four edges like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. At the other end, you're only going to cut next to where you traced. So I'm going to do right here and right there. So one end is going to have one flap that bends back like this. The other end again is going to have two flaps. Do two just like this. Once you have two pieces that look like this with two flaps at one end and one at the other, we're going to attach this to the top of column number 8, and it's going to attach to the double tall number 1 column. And to attach to the right height, you could count off 11 blocks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's just, however, it's just the top one from the bottom column right here. So before you attach the piece above it. But if you want to make sure you do it right, count off the 11th. And then this piece will fit over the top of this with the flap pointing down like this. And you put these flaps from this beam around the outside. And you'll see how nicely that fits on. Make sure this goes down. So this should be horizontal. Make sure it's just pushed down all the way, and that this is lined up with those dotted lines on the 11th squared up. And you just tape it in place. And the other one, you'll probably guess, is going to go between columns 2 and 5. And you take the end that has only one flap, that's going to fit over the top of this, column number 5, and then the other end will go over column 2 right here on the 11th square from the bottom. Next we're going to take that beam that you put aside, the one with the two flaps on each end, and that's going to go between these two horizontal pieces here. And it's going to go between the third square here and the third square on the far side over here. And you can just go in kind of diagonally like this, and then rotate it until it's in place. Make sure, like I said, it's over the third square from this end. So go up from column 5, and then over 3 squares, and the same thing from column 8 over there. And then make sure that the sides are pushed in, and then tape these around the tops and sides until it's secure. And this is what it looks like when you're done across here. Okay, we're almost done with the structure. The only thing we have to do is add a couple more beams and a couple more diagonal supports to make it stronger. So we'll need to make 2 more beams. You can go ahead and cut off the end. I'm going to cut the end that doesn't say anything on it. So I'm going to cut off 1 square's worth of paper here. That'll give us the correct length, because we're going to go between these two, not the 2 columns, but between this beam and this beam, which is going to be the same distance as if it were between the 2 columns. So we're going to trace along here, and we're going to trace the thin lines, again the second and the fourth one on both sides, because we're going to need 2 flaps on both ends. So before I cut it, once again, where you look and you see I've traced on the thin lines, the second and fourth on each side, and you do that on both ends. And you cut and tape as usual. And it should look like this, and you're going to need 2 that look just like this. Okay, we're going to attach these 2 new beams across from the low. Let's try that again. We're going to attach this beam between these 2 low beams down here by sliding it in like this in place, and it's going to be right up against this flap right here. Is going to be right up against this column number 3. I'm going to slide the other one in place as well before I start doing any taping. And you're just going to tape it securely in place. And this is going to, there's going to be a half pipe sitting on top of this, so make sure it's very secure. This taller portion of the roller coaster is a little bit wobbly, so we're going to add a couple of diagonal supports which will help to make that a lot stronger. You should have one sheet that has 4 diagonal supports on there. We're going to trace on all the thick dotted lines and then cut on the solid lines. We're going to cut off this strip at the ends. I'm going to cut this into 4 pieces right here. So right down the middle, the long way and then the short way. I'm going to go ahead and just make 2 of these for now. Next I'm going to fold and tape together. For this I can use one long piece of tape, and if I hold this down, it's a little tricky. It might be better to use a small piece in the middle and then put pieces around the end. So I'm going to go around the ends like this, tape it together like that. I have not cut those yet, but I'm going to do that now. And these flaps are going to bend back like this. So you need 2 of them just like that. We're going to attach one of these diagonal supports to this crossbar and column number 2 right up at the top here. So we're going to take this piece right here that you just made, and these corner pieces will fit around the crossbar as well as column 2, and these flaps here should bend inward like this. Okay, and you put pieces of tape on these flaps on the outside as well as the flaps on the inside. So it'll be a total of 3 pieces of tape on each side, and you can also put one more piece across here, which also will help to make it a little stronger. I like to put tape right down along this edge as well. By adding this diagonal support, we'll make it stronger in this direction, so it's less likely to wobble left and right as you're facing it in this direction. Now to make it stronger in this direction so it doesn't wobble like this, we're going to add this diagonal support from column number 1 to this crossbar right here. And you attach it the same way as before, making sure that this diagonal support is right up against both of these pieces. So make sure it's not just like that, that it's as close as it can get to both of them. And this edge right here should be touching the column, and this edge right here should be touching this beam. This part now should be much stronger already. This is what your structure should look like so far. Now right now you have basically 2 different structures, which will make the whole thing a little weaker than it could be. So we're going to tie these 2 together with a short beam just going between this crossbar and this crossbar here. To do that, you're going to take another sheet of beams. You're going to trace along the thick dotted lines as usual. Cut down the middle. Put one of these aside, we'll use it later. This one we're actually only going to use the last 5 of these squares. So we're going to cut to leave 5 squares, so count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right here. This smaller piece is going to use to connect these 2 beams right here. Trace along the 2nd and 4th lines on both sides. So I've already done that here, here, and here. And you're going to fold it and tape it together as usual. And cut along the corners to the first line. Fold back these flaps. There should be 2 on each end, opposite each other. I'm going to attach this beam between these 2 cross beams here, and to do that I'm going to push this flap outward, and I'm going to turn it diagonally and then rotate it into place. And you're going to skip 3 squares and you're going to attach it to the 4th from the right. This is closer to columns 7 and 8, so you're going to have 4 squares to the left and 3 to the right if you're looking at it from this direction. So once again I have columns 7 and 8 on this side, and Make sure you attach it in the right spot. So it's going to go right there. If your distance between these two beams is slightly different, you might need to adjust the length of this beam to fit it properly. And you're going to then attach all these flaps. Don't forget these flaps on the underside as well. By adding that one crossbar, you'll see that your whole structure has become much more stable now. The first piece of track that we're going to build is a half pipe, and for that you're going to need 3 sheets of paper. You're going to need one labeled half pipe floor, one labeled half pipe. These will be the walls of the half pipe. And the sheet that has half pipe braces, we're going to need one of those as well. Let's start with the piece that says half pipe. And there's 2 different types of dotted lines on here. There's very thin lines, and then there's thick dotted lines. We're going to trace along the thick dotted lines, and we're going to be folding along those lines. We do not trace along the thin lines. Those are going to be to help us align where the floor is going to go, but they do not need to be traced. So first I'm just going to trace along all the thick dotted lines. Next I'm going to cut along all the solid black lines, and when they don't go all the way to the edge, you're still going to cut all the way to the edge. Don't forget these 2 little lines down here. Don't forget to save this piece as labeled exit. We're going to use this later. All the thick dotted lines are going to be valley folds, so we can start by folding them up like this, like this. After we've done that to both pieces, we can just put this aside for now. We're going to put these aside. Next we'll need the half pipe floor. And once again we're going to trace along the thick dotted lines. Very careful on this edge. It looks like it's almost straight. The dotted line, the long edge here, that's one dotted line, but then you have to turn your ruler so that this edge goes out this direction, and this one over here, this short line over here, goes out like that. So it's not one dotted line. The same thing at the other end. I'm going to cut out these corners here right now. There's a little triangle here, so cut out that entire triangle. It's a very thin triangle, it's just like this. Same with the other end over here. And before I cut out these triangle shapes here, I'm going to fold along here, so I just need to make one long fold, that way they're all even with each other. If you cut first and then fold one at a time, you might not make all the folds kind of one nice straight line here. I'm going to fold along this side. I'm going to unfold it again. I'm going to cut out all these triangle shapes on both sides. This piece in the middle here is actually obviously not a triangle. The trapezoid, we're going to cut out the entire shape just like this. And continue cutting out triangles. These last lines here we're going to wait to cut until later. Now we can fold up this edge and this edge as well. Next we're going to take these flaps on here, these kind of long rectangular flaps, and we're going to fold them down on the inside here. I'm going to put this edge of this flap is going to press against the floor, and I'm going to tape it in place like that, so against the wall here. Same thing on this end over here. So I'm going to take this flap, push it down against the floor, and I'm going to tape it against the wall. The little flaps on this end, I'm going to tape this on the outside here. And I want to make sure that the bottom edge of this flap is against the floor, in this case the table I'm on. And the same thing at this end. This little flap is going to be the outside, taped to the wall, and so that it's touching the table. The half-pipe floor that has the notch in it is going to line up with this gap in the wall. And we have 4 trapezoids on one side and 4 on the other we need to line up. So I'm going to start in the middle here. I'm going to tape down one of these and I line the trapezoid up over the dotted line. I'm going to wrap it around the other side of this wall here. And do the same thing on the other side. Be very careful to line it up. I'm going to work my way out. Try to make sure this curve stays as curved as possible. Try not to have it change shape too much. And you might be able to do a few at a time like this. And the other side. And make sure the end ones are very secure. Put some more on this one right here. Up. Right there. If it's going over the edge of the table, onto the table here, I can just roll it this way and it will then stick to the other side of the paper. Demonstrate that again. So it's touching the table, I can just roll it like this, and now it's taped to the other side. I'll put some tape on this side as well. Try to make it as secure as possible. You want to use some white glue along that edge. That might also work well if you have the time to let it dry. Alright, this side of the floor will attach to this wall right here. Line up. I'm going to start in the middle again. I'm going to skip a little bit to the right here. Skip over a couple. Make sure this one is good. I'm going to skip to the end. I want to make sure this stays as nice and smooth curve as possible. That's even more important than lining it up exactly to my dots here. And on this side, try to make a nice smooth curve. Now if you don't like any of these spots that you did, you may need to use a knife to cut them loose and make some readjustments. This one right here, I didn't line up with the dotted line very well. I'm going to redo this one here. It's a little bit smoother. Make sure you didn't skip any. And when you're done, put some tape on the other side, just like with the first wall. Alright, this will not sit very cleanly until you've actually mounted it to your board. You will need 2 just like this. Before I go any further though, I'm going to hold this side down. I'm just going to test it out. So I'm just going to make sure that it will actually roll out. Nice. I'm going to tape these side flaps, both these large ones in the front and these ones in this end here, to the wall. That will help to make it a little more secure. Now make sure you don't tape it at an angle like this. You want to make sure that this wall is as straight up and down as you can manage. We're going to take the piece labeled exit and we're going to tape that across here. That will make this whole thing a little bit stronger. I'm just going to tape it. You can tape it on the inside or the outside, does not really matter. I'll put the tape right on here first. This is our entrance to the half pipe, so we're going to be cutting along these lines to make the entrance easier so it doesn't just drop in. And that's going to weaken the half pipe, so to make that stronger we're going to use one of these half pipe braces. I'm going to show you how to make one of those right now. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trace along these 3 thick dotted lines. I'm going to cut out this shape right here. This will actually make 4 braces if necessary. I also need to cut these little slots right here, these solid dark lines. Alright, next up I'm going to fold all these lines right here. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to fold it up into a triangle shape, like this. And I'm just going to put a piece of tape across here. This brace is going to go on the underside of our half pipe, right near where the parts are we're going to be cutting. So I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to take this right along here, and this should be a flat surface right here. So I'm going to put one piece of tape here. Another one over in this corner. And one long piece along here. Put my hand in here so I can squeeze that on well. Alright, so now when we cut along here, this part will stay strong because of this, the rigidity of this piece right here. And you will need 2 of these half pipes for your roller coaster. Okay, we're going to attach the first half pipe to the board at the same end as columns number 1 and 2. And I want you to attach it so that these 2 lines here are going to be on the left side as you're facing columns 1 and 2. Don't try to fit it in between these 2 columns. It'll be a little too narrow. But if you turn it like this and then lower it in like that, it should fit very easily. And I want you to line up this little small wall here with the with this edge of column 1 right here. So I'm just going to line it up like that. And I'm going to tape it to the base and to the column. And over here it'll come close, but maybe not quite touch this column. That's fine. You're going to tape it right here. Put some tape down the edge like this to hold it in place. And also put some tape, hope you can see that, on this flap down there, which is pretty hard to see, but down under there you should be able to see another flap that you can tape down. And then tape down this side as well, where the opening is. So the opening should be between columns 2 and 5. And that's how the first half pipe will be mounted. Next we're going to attach the other half pipe. And this one will go on top of these 2 beams that go between columns 3 and 6 and between 4 and 7. You're going to place a line halfway between this first line here and the second line. This is the beam between 3 and 6. And put a line right down the middle of that section. That will show you where the left edge of the half pipe will go. I'm going to slide this between these columns, and I'm going to put the left edge so it's right over that line that we just drew. And then you can attach it everywhere, basically everywhere possible. So you can attach it along this edge, and this wall should be flush with this surface of the beam. I can attach it to this corner here by putting a piece of tape along there. Around this side it should be about flush with this. It might be a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, it doesn't really matter. You can also put pieces of tape on the underside here on these flaps from the half pipe where they touch these beams, and that's a good place to tape it down as well. And we're going to attach one more beam across from this column 4 to column 3, and it's going to be on the inside of the half pipe, and it's going to rest and it's going to hold the catch for when the marble jumps onto right before it goes into the half pipe. And we need to figure out what length it's going to be. I'm going to hold this end of the beam flush with this end of this edge of the column, and I'm going to mark over here where this beam starts. And I'm also going to mark, say, the far end of the beam, like this. And this is where I'm going to cut, and this is where I'm going to fold the flaps. And this end I'm going to fold flaps on this first line right here. So I'm going to cut on this line right here. And I'm going to trace There's going to have to be 2 flaps on here. I don't want to have to bend the one that's double thickness, so I'm going to skip that one, which means, in my case, I'm going to do it on this line here, and line over here. I want to do the same lines on the far side of the beam here. So right there, and right there. If you want to put lines on all of them, that's fine. You just don't need to fold them all. I cut. Now, since this one was cut after I taped it at this end, you'll notice it start to sort of come apart right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one more piece of tape right over the end. You should have one that looks like this. And this should, if you measured it properly, it should fit right between columns 3 and 4. And you may need to push it, this actually may not wrap around. You may need to push it down inside the beam, inside of the half pipe. I'm sorry, you may need to push it inside of the half pipe. And you should actually push it down lower. So these flaps are not going to bend around the outside unless you trim it and bend part of the flap around. So I'm going to push this all the way down basically. And I want to leave just enough space for a marble to get through here. Make sure the marble can pass under there. And tape it in place right even with these columns, just like that. There's a good chance to test out both of the half pipes to make sure that the marble actually will spend a lot of time in each half pipe and then exit at the end when it slows down enough. Next step we're going to do is to connect the upper half pipe with the lower half pipe. And to do that we're going to need a half pipe exit. Find a piece labeled half pipe exit. A piece labeled 180 degree turn. And you'll need some straight tracks, which are the red ones. I'm going to start with the half pipe exit. Trace on the thick dotted lines. Now these dotted lines right here are not quite in a straight line, so try to trace right on the lines. Trying to make sure you match where the lines actually are drawn. They turn a little bit, and that's important here. Next we're going to cut on these 2 lines right here. Fold along the 2 long edges here, like that. We're going to cut out these 2 shapes. They look like cartoon houses. Try to cut as close to those lines as possible. Alright, next we're going to tape along the bottom here by bringing these shapes together like that. And you just want to bring them edge to edge. You do not want to overlap them. If you go like that, it won't be the right shape when you're done. So bring them so they're just touching. Place a little piece of tape across there. This piece was a lot bigger than I needed. And do the same thing over here. Put a little piece of tape right there. When you're doing this, try not to put any tape on these flaps because that will keep them from bending upwards, which is the next step. So we bend these upward, and if they're vertical, they should be meeting about edge to edge. So the easiest way to put these 3 tabs together is put one piece across the middle, like that, so that it's extending over the top of that flap and to the sides. Then I line up these 2 flaps right here. I push the tape down so it's touching. I do the same thing over here. I push these 2 tabs so they're just touching. Then I push the tape down. Then I push the tape over the side. I push in the middle here first. Then over like that. Over like that. And this is now my half pipe exit. Then you bend these flaps backwards. Like that, and that's going to attach to the half pipe where the marble comes out. Let's go ahead and do the 180-degree turn. That's very similar to the half-pipe exit. Trace along the thick dotted lines, fold and unfold, cut out these shapes. I tape along the floor, the middle section of this. I'll put tape across these two gaps right here. Well, usually it's easier just to do one at a time. Alright, bend the flaps up again. I'm going to go across these two gaps with one piece of tape. I'm going to put a piece of tape across this flap right here. So it's extending over each side and over the top. So a piece about this big should do fine. I don't know if you can see that. But line up these two tabs, attach the tape, line up these two tabs, attach the tape, and I fold it around the other side. Do the same thing across here as well. Alright, so now I have my half pipe and my 180-degree turn. Next I need some straight tracks. Let's do two of those for now. Trace along the thick dotted lines. Cut out those two strips. Make valley folds along each of those lines you just traced. You're also going to need a couple of these pieces labeled short shelf, and they're going to hold up the straight track across that long distance between the first half pipe and the second half pipe. So you're not going to need this whole piece right here, you only need this little part down here. I'm going to go ahead and trace along the dotted line. And across this dotted line right here. I'm going to cut this piece out. I'm going to pretend that this line extended off this direction. Can't quite see it, but I'm going to do it like that. I'm going to cut it out like so. This thin gray piece right here can be discarded. You don't need that. Alright, then you also cut along these thick lines right here. This is going to bend downward like this. The sides bend downward. And this piece that says short shelf will bend upward like this. This will attach to the side of your columns. I need two of these. Okay, we're going to start by attaching this small shelf to column number 8. So make sure you do it to the right one. And make sure you're in the right spot. We need to count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th block up. And just put a line across the middle of that block. And that is going to be approximately where we're going to put the top edge of this flap right here. Go ahead and tape that on. This part where the track will actually rest, make sure that's horizontal. So these tabs on the side also need to be horizontal. They should not be pointing up or down. So make sure that it's horizontal. I'm going to hold it in place. I'm going to tape down the tab on the left side and the right side. Alright, it should be just wide enough to rest the track on it, like that. I'm just going to attach the half pipe exit to one of these straight tracks. And we're not attaching this end with the flaps, that's going to attach to the half pipe. We're going to rest this end, which says half pipe exit, on top of the straight track and overlap it so most of the length of this is inside here. Most of this last section should be inside of the straight track. And I'm going to tape these sides together. This green part needs to sit inside it. Do not do this way because it will form a little bit of a bump and the marble might get stuck there. So you want the marble to drop down from the first track onto the second track as it travels. So I'm going to hold this, make sure it's pressed all the way down. I'm going to put a piece of tape on the inside here. Hold this red track so that it's vertical. Press it there. Make sure they're together. Do the same thing on this side. I'm going to put the tape from the outside here over to the inside. Push down and fold over. Alright, next we're going to attach this piece to the exit on the first half pipe, the upper half pipe, and then the other end is going to rest on top of this shelf. And to do that, I'm going to first tape the bottom tab right here. I want to make sure that when the marble leaves the exit that it drops down a little bit. I do not want this to be too high to stop the marble from coming out of the half pipe. So I'm going to lower it so it's a little bit below the half pipe. If you lower it too much, That will make this section uphill, and the marble will not be able to continue on its journey here. So I'm going to put a little piece of tape on the tab at the bottom like this, and I'm going to carefully line it up. When I have it where I want it, I'm going to push that tape down. This is a little tricky, so I'm going to actually put a little piece of tape over on this end right now, just to hold this in place so I can get these tabs right where I need them. Okay, so now this end is pretty well attached, and I'm going to check to make sure that the marble will still exit the way it's supposed to. So I'm just going to put the marble in right here, make sure that it will leave the half pipe and continue to the right. Perfect. Next I'm going to attach the other straight track to this 180-degree turn. I'm going to attach it to the right side if you're looking at it like this. I'm going to attach it to this side right here. I'm going to put the straight track inside the 180-degree turn, inside the green piece. And I want to make sure that it's kind of continuing this direction right here. I don't want it to bend outward this way or that way. So just like that. And I'm going to put a piece of tape, on the red piece, fold it over this direction, and then fold it over. I'm going to do the same thing on the outside here, make sure it extends onto the red piece, and then fold it over on the other side. Just like that. We're going to attach this shelf piece onto column number 1 on this side, and it needs to be a little bit lower than this shelf on column number 8. Count up 1, 2, 3, and about 3 3/4 right here. And we're going to attach the shelf on this side, same side as where the red track will be coming from. So line up the top of that to there. Now there. Tape down the tabs on the sides. Next we're going to cut a flap in the half pipe for the marble to exit. And to figure out where we're going to cut that flap, just lay this, put this edge of the straight track up against this column, column number 1, and move this to the left until the green part is touching the half pipe. And then you're going to put a line, I'm going to use a marker so you can see it better, where the left edge and the right edges will be lined up as close as you can get it. So right along this spot and this spot. And you're going to cut those walls to make an opening for the marble to go through. And bend that flap down. Next you're going to put this turn right onto that flap that you just bent out, and you're going to push it as far to the left as you can. You may want to trim a little bit of this green part off so it will fit the angle a little bit better. And I'm just cutting a little bit of the green part off, not much. You can skip that if you want. And push that as far to the left as you can. I'm going to take a piece of tape and put it on the underside of this flap. I'm going to lay down this green track right on top. Push the tape so it's touching the sides of the green track. I'm going to put a piece of tape on the inside of the half pipe onto the green track, so bend this wall so it's straight up and down. Just like that. I'm going to fold this tape over. I'm going to do the same thing on this side as well. Okay, now these two pieces need to have a little bit of work done. You're going to cut off a little bit of this second track, the one that leads towards the second half pipe. And I want to make sure that it doesn't overlap with this column at all. What I'm going to do is just cut off a little bit of this. I'm going to bend it so that I'm going to get it under this first one, so the marble will go from the upper track to the lower track. I'm going to hold it in place. I'm going to tape that together. Put tape piece of tape on this track. Tape that down around the other side. And do the same thing over here. I'm going to put a piece of tape here and fold it around like that. And here it's very important to actually test out your marble. Alright, that's pretty good. To finish the end of the track, you're going to need 2 90-degree turns, 1 half-pipe exit, 3 of these short shelves, 1, 2, 3, and some straight tracks. This time I'm going to attach the half-pipe exit to the half-pipe without attaching a straight track first. I think it might be a little bit easier that way. I'm going to attach it just below this entrance, basically so the top edge of this is lined up with that line right there. So put tape on the back of the tab like this. Line it up like that, and push the tape down when I have it lined up right there. And then these 2 tabs should point straight up and down. Just to make sure marble will come out of there still. Oh, where are you going? There you go. Along this stretch we're going to attach 2 of these little shelves. First one's going to be on column number 6, and the other one's going to attach to column 3, both on this side though. Column 6 we're going to attach so that the top edge of this is right on the second line. You want to draw a line right there, that's fine. So I'm going to line that up, tape on this first piece, and tape the sides, and it should be just a little bit off of the base at this point. The next short shelf is going to be in this corner on column number 3. It's going to be facing out this way. I'm going to place it so it's basically resting on the track, and it should be a little bit below that line. So I'm going to tape it just like that. The last of these shelves is going to be attached to column number 4 on the far side, on this right side if you're looking at it from this angle right here. And it's going to be too tall to make this have a downhill going between columns 3 and 4. I'm going to have to shorten this a little bit. So all I'm going to do is just cut about half of one of these flaps on the side here. I'm going to cut about half of this flap. Do the same thing on this side as well. And then rest this on the board before I attach it. It's going to be just like this. There you go. Take one of the 90-degree turns and one of the straight tracks. Lay the straight track in this side of the 90-degree turn. So if you're looking at it like a U, it would be on the left side. Put the track inside here just till it's almost to that first joint in the turn. And tape it in place. And we're going to rest that in here, and we're going to place this joint again so it's right along this edge right here of this column number 3. And you can go ahead and tape it in place right here. To do that, just put a piece of tape right across here. And the same thing over here. And take another straight track. This one's going to be taped to the underside of this half pipe exit right here. And then this part is going to fit on top of this straight track. I'm going to overlap this as much as I can before it starts to turn. Right there. Put a piece of tape across here. And then on the other side. And this is a lot of extra track. We don't need it to be double thickness all the way there. So if you want to trim it, you might find some use for that piece later. Just make sure you leave some overlap. It makes it stronger. Tape those two together. And if you want to tape this down on the underside as well, it might help. Now this is bending outward a little bit, which can make you go over the maximum width in the rules. So you might want to just either bend these all the way, make sure it's bent in well. I'll show you something later. You can use a bracket over the top. Let's do that now. These are brackets, and this is a lot more than you'll ever need for this project, but you can go ahead and trace along the thick dotted line, cut along here, fold, and you can cut a couple of them out. You don't have to just cut out one. Let's do two here. And wherever your track is bending outward, you can just put this over the top like this and tape it on both sides, and that will keep it from bowing outward and causing your track to be too wide. Make sure when the marble comes out that it has enough clearance under that bracket that it won't get stuck right there. I'm just going to take the other 90-degree turn you've made and place it on top of one end of a red straight track like this, so that it's this end of the curved track. If you're holding it as a U, it would be the right side here. And tape that in place. Place the other end of the red straight track on top of another straight track and overlap it by an inch or so, a few centimeters. Now we're going to need one more section. If you want to use that little piece, let's see. If you want to use this little piece that you made before, you cut off. I'm going to overlap this just a bit. This will cover about the full length of this back side of the roller coaster. To make the end part here, we're just going to cut along the edge here, fold the end up, fold these side flaps around, and write finish line on here. It's a little harder to write once you've had it folded, so I'm going to write finish line, I don't know, a couple inches from the end. You don't need to make it too close to the end. It's not going to make much difference as far as the timing goes. It's not going to give you that much extra time if it goes another ½ an inch. So I'm going to draw a line here. And I'm going to label it finish line. I'm going to cut out the ends, bend these flaps back on the side to as far as where you cut, and then you fold this flap up as well, and then there's this, you can fold these flaps on the outside like this, and then tape it around the end here. Okay, there's your finish line. This is bending outwards a little bit, so I'm going to use a couple more brackets. I'm not going to put it right over the finish line and block the view of that, but I'm going to put it about over here. Next, attach this long stretch here to this side of your board, and you're going to have the green end sitting on top of here, the other end resting right on the board to make it a slight downhill the whole way. I'm going to attach it so that this corner, the very beginning of this turn, is right flush with this corner of this is column 4 right here. I'm going to attach it right there. You can also put tape around the underside and tape it to the small shelf we got down there. On this end, we can just tape it to the column if it reaches. We can just take the end of this and tape it down to the board. And we can also use some tape here to tape it to columns 7 and 8. Alright, if this is bending outward, again, and if this piece up here is bending outward, you might want to use one of those brackets. A couple of the brackets. And the last thing we'll need to do down here is to connect a straight track between these two sections. You need to trim one of these straight tracks so it'll go between this edge right here where it starts to turn to the beginning of this turn over here. So I've figured out it's about to there. So I'm going to cut that, make sure it will fit between there. And ideally what you'll do is you'll put it under the one on the left, where column number 3 is. So the red track goes under that and on top over here. That way the marble is always dropping down onto the next section. It never hits the front edge that might not have been attached very well. So this looks about right. I'm going to tape it right there. At this point, you should make sure the whole ending part of the track works and that the marble will continue to roll all the way to the finish line. Make sure you test it out on a level surface. If the table is not level, you can't put a marble on here and have it just stop in one spot, then your table may not be level. You might want to test it out on the ground or on the floor if that's the most level spot. Anyway, I'm just going to put it in this half pipe right here near the exit. You might not be able to see it the whole way, but it did finish. All right, find the piece labeled upper half pipe entry and cut out around the outside edge here. Trace along the thick dotted lines and then cut along the straight solid lines. Before we fold it all, we're going to cut along these little slits here. And fold this upward, fold that up, fold there, and this one goes up like that. There is one labeled mountain fold. That one actually will bend backwards like that. Take this piece here and fold it inward and put a piece of tape across here. Like that. Then it should look like this. Okay, this is the upper half pipe, and we're going to cut along these two lines right on the wall here. We're not going to cut along the floor of the half pipe though. So cut on this line here and this line right here. Bend that outward. Then take this half pipe entry that we just made, bend this wall back so it goes on the outside, and you're going to line it up just like that. Line up the top edge of this half pipe entry with the wall of the half pipe and tape this down. And then you're going to tape this flap as well. The whole thing should tip a little bit to the left and tip towards the half pipe a slight amount. Let's tape this flap down over here. Our marble placed over here should go into the half pipe. I'm going to very carefully place a piece of tape across this tab, making sure that there's no sticky parts sticking up. Next thing we're going to make is the catch. That will catch the marble as it leaves the jump and before it enters the first half pipe. And to do that, you're going to need to find a piece labeled catch, which is on yellow paper, and the 270 degree turn. So one of them is labeled 270 degrees. And we'll start with the 270 degree turn. And that one is built very similarly to how you build the 180 degree turn or the 90 degree turn. Exactly. That's the 270 degree turn. Next, take a piece that's labeled catch and trace along the thick dotted lines. Cut around the outside edge and also these solid lines that go into the piece a little bit right here. Next, make valley folds along the lines we traced. So this bends up and this bends up. We're going to attach these two pieces together. The way this works, this little tab right here on the catch is going to fit on the inside, as well as this strip from the catch. And this large piece is going to go around either the outside or the inside. Let's try the inside. Just like that. Line up this vertical edge here on the catch, it should line up with the beginning of the 270-degree turn. Like that. I'm going to tape down the wall, the two walls together right here. This piece has to be pushed so it's right up against that wall here, as much as you can. You do not want it leaning outward like this, because the marble will have a lot of speed when it comes in here and may just ride up this wall and leave. So you have to make sure that it's vertical, just like that. So make sure that also that it's pushed it as far as you can. If it takes a shortcut like this, the marble might not fit in here and it'll get stuck. So make sure you're not making the wall any narrower than it needs to be. I'm going to put tape, in this case the tape will be on the outside here. Tape down this tab right here. And make sure that the wall that you made, the wall on the yellow piece is right up against the wall on the green piece. And you might want to put a piece of tape on the bottom here as well to make it more secure. Okay, and that's what it should look like when you're done. Next we're going to attach this structure to the half pipe. And this is the upper half pipe. The first one the marble will go into, the upper one. And I want to attach it so that this part of the turn will end up inside of this upper half pipe entry right here. We also want to make sure that the opening here, where the catch is going to actually catch the marble, is facing basically the far corner, the furthest corner away, because that's where the marble is going to be coming from. So to do that, make this edge right here about parallel with the edge of your board. So it's not going to be pointing kind of straight out, so the middle is pointing along the board. I'm going to angle it a little bit to the right. The left edge is kind of parallel with the edge of the board. And I need to move it back far enough so that this end of the turn is right above this red part down here. So it's going to put it about there. And I'm going to put some tape on the outside here. On the side over here, I'm going to put some tape as well. And I'm also going to put a little bit of tape on the underside of the catch down the beginning of the beam. To connect the green piece to the red piece here, we're going to need to cut a little bit of the wall piece. So I'm going to look at where the left edge of this wall intersects this outer wall of the red piece here, and I'm going to cut right down just the outside wall here. I just want enough so I can bend this piece down and then put this green piece right inside there. And I'm going to tape that down. I'm going to tape this inside wall of the green piece to the red piece here. I'm going to attach this piece here as well. I'm going to put some tape on the outside here and the underside down here as well. Next, make sure when a marble lands in here that it actually goes through the whole thing and comes down into the half pipe. So give it a little bit of speed to test it out. Alright, that is a problem. If that happens to you, figure out what it's getting stuck on. It looks like I'm going to need to trim that half pipe opening a little bit to get it to work. I'm going to test it again. And don't just test it once, make sure that it works every time. Next we're going to make a loop. It is all on this one sheet of paper. I've cut it up already. Take these two strips and put them aside. We're going to save these for later. We may use them later. These two little pieces can be put aside. You don't think we'll need those again. These two are going to be the entrance and exit to your loop. So we'll hold on to those. First we're going to make the two parts of the main parts of the loop. So they're labeled large cloth-eyed loop, both of them. And you're going to trace the thick dotted lines first. When you trace this, make sure that you are right down the center of that dotted line. Next we're going to make mountain folds on those lines, so we're going to bend them back. This is very stiff paper, so try not to wrinkle it any more than necessary. Both sides, make a nice clean crease the whole way. Next step, you're going to cut down each of these lines. the length of the line and make sure you reach the dotted line. If you stop a little short, you're not going to be able to bend the paper and make a loop shape. So I'm going to cut all the way to here. And turn around and do the same thing on the other side. Next we're going to tape these pieces together. I'm going to start at the end that has the phrase fold back on the right end here. I'm going to put a piece of tape on the corner next to this gray triangle, and it's going to stick out over the top and over the right side. And it's also going to be angled a little bit to the left. I'll put a piece like this, I'm going to angle it to the left a little bit. See if I can get that. And I'm going to bring this piece so that that gray triangle, that edge right there, is lined up with this edge of the paper. So I'm going to bring it right like that. And I push down on the tape, and I fold the tape around the other side. Then I go on to the next piece. Put a piece of tape on here, angle it away, meaning angling it to the left a little bit. So when I line this up and press it down, the tape will be able to go straight over the top. If I do not do that, if I just angle it, if I put it straight up and down like this, when I go like this, the tape will be kind of pointing to the right too much, and it won't stick onto this tab very much. So try to angle it to the left a little bit. Line it up, touch that together, pull it over. Do it for the whole length of the loop here. I'm going to turn it over, I'm going to do the other side. And notice how these kind of sticking out every way. You're going to push these so that the gray part is at least partially hidden behind the white tab next to it. After you do that, we'll almost hold its shape. Again, we're going to start at the end that says fold back. Put the tape on here. This time I'm angling it to the right a little bit, so it's pointing away from the piece I'm going to tape it to. Line that up, push it down, fold it over. Do the whole length just like that. You only need to do 2 of them just like this. Next we're going to make the entrance and exits to the loop. And those are these small pieces right here. And you're going to make these exactly the same way as the main part of the loop. So you trace, fold backwards, cut it along the slits, and tape it all together. We're going to connect the whole loop now, and for that you'll need the 2 main parts of the loop, the entry and exit pieces that should be identical, and you also need a couple of connectors. So look for the sheet that's labeled connectors right here. We're going to actually only use the short ones at one end, so we're going to need 2 of these. So we're going to use these 2 pieces right here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my main 2 pieces, I'm going to connect them together. And I'm going to put the right one, if I hold it like this so that it's tighter at the top of the loop, I'm going to put that one on the right. I'm going to lay it on top of this one. And I'm going to fit it inside, just like that. So I'm putting the right one inside so it fits like this. And to know how much to overlap it, and you do want to overlap it at least a little bit, we're going to use these little black marks that are on there. So make sure you can see that. So I'm going to line it up like that, and I want to push down so there's no bump under there. I want it to be pushed down, lined up with that black line. I'm going to start a little piece of tape across the top. I'm going to put tape on the sides. And make sure you fold it around the other side as well. Turn around this side. And this edge right here on this little tab should be parallel to this edge. Even if in this case I've overlapped it a little beyond the line, but that's okay. As long as those 2 are parallel, I'll know that my loop will be kind of continuous. Okay, I am not going to put any tape on the inside of there. It just gives another possible place for tape to accidentally come loose and possibly stick to a marble. Alright, so it should look like this. And right now, there is a difference between this side and this side. Because of the bump that's in there, I would prefer to have the marble going this direction, fall off the bump, instead of hitting that and possibly jumping away and getting all messed up. So I'm going to try to keep this as the beginning of the loop. So this is where the marble is going to enter and then leave at the other side. Next I'm going to take two of these short connectors. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those out. And before I cut them apart from each other, I'm just going to trace on the dotted lines. I'm going to fold those upward like that. And cut those in half. And I want to make sure that the entrance and exit to my loops are as smooth as possible, so that's why we're going to use these connectors. And to use one, all you need to do is take about half of it so it's overlapped and under the loop. I'm going to tape it on the sides, both sides, and I'm going to put some tape around the bottom side as well here. I'm not going to put any tape across this surface here though. Make sure that it's pushed down so it's just right up against here. So I'm going to even push it down on the table like this to make sure. Do the same thing on the other side here. Put some tape on the outside. Next we're going to take this other piece and push it down onto here as well so that these two edges just come together and form a nice smooth merge between one piece and the other. And I'm going to put tape on the outside and on the underside as well, just like before. At this point you can put a piece of tape across the gap right here to make sure they stay together. I'll put this right over the middle of that piece and fold it over. Do the same thing over here. I'm going to put tape across the bottom. Alright, that should make a nice smooth transition from one piece to the other. And do the same thing with the other piece over here. On my loop, one side is going to be the entrance and one side is going to be the exit. To figure out which side I should use, I'm going to look at the top where the paper overlaps from one half loop to the other. And I don't know if you can see it, but on mine the left side is on top of the right side on the outside. And that means the left side here is going to be the entrance to my loop. I'm going to put a little E down here for entrance just so I don't forget. And over here on the other side is going to be where it's going to take off. So this might be the best time to write the word gap. Because you need to have the gap labeled, and since this is going to be jumping off from here, this is going to be the beginning of the gap. So I'm going to put gap, and I'm going to put an arrow to the right, so it should look something like that. I want this to be as smooth a transition as possible. If I put this on inside, it won't be bad, but there will be a little drop off, and it might make the marble start to bounce as it's going around the loop, and that can really mess it up. So I'm going to use again another piece of connector. This time I'm going to use a long piece of connector. I'm going to need two of them right now. So I'm going to go ahead and trace and fold along here and then cut them out. So I'm going to attach one to my entrance here, which I've labeled E. I'm going to put this on the outside. We're going to attach this the same way we did over here. I'm going to put this piece of paper inside here and tape this together. Now since this paper that we're using for the loop is actually double thickness paper, I'm going to put another piece of straight track right inside the first one here. And that will make this a very smooth transition so that there's no bump between going from the thinner paper up to the thicker paper. Then I can tape this all together. Don't forget to put some around where the actual gap between the two pieces are as well. Again, I'm not going to put any on the floor here in case it forms any bumps. To extend the entrance even further, what we're going to do is take one of these connectors and place it around the outside of this piece here. And I'm going to keep this from flopping over left and right while I'm doing it, I'm just going to lean it against my structure here. About half of my connector is overlapping with the track. Take it down. I'm going to take two tracks. I'm going to put them in all at once here. I'm going to put taper on the outside. And don't forget to put a piece across the gap between this straight track and this straight track. Now because of the extra thickness here, it will tend to bow outward. So we're going to use some brackets to keep that from happening, kind of like we did near the end of the track. We also don't want the marble bouncing back and forth as it's going down, so we want this to be one smooth track all the way down. I'm going to do 3 sets of these. So I'm going to do 2 at a time here. I'll put one down near the bottom, one near the middle, and one near the top. But for now I'm just going to do one near the bottom and one near the middle. Make sure that your marble, if your track ended up being cut a little short, the marble might not even fit through there. So I want to maybe lift it off there a little bit. So there's no chance of the marble bouncing and hitting this, which is a big concern. I want to put tape on the outside of here, across the bottom. I'm going to lay it across right where I want it, so I want it to be sticking over the track a little bit. So about here. Flip it over to this side, and do the same thing over here, making sure that that is sticking above the track a little bit. So there's a little bit of a gap above the track. And do the same thing where these two come together. So I'm leaving some of it sticking over the top. Flip it over, and right about there. Okay, the marble should be able to go through there very easily now. Very good. Let's save the third one until it's mounted on the roller coaster structure to figure out exactly where I'm going to put this third one. The rules for Science Olympiad state that the 2 halves of the loop, the 2 parts of the loop, must touch, so it can't be spread apart like this. So to make sure that you don't break that rule, we're going to actually tape them together. So I'm going to put a piece of tape. I'm going to put a piece of tape over here and around the other side. Just like that, and then fold it around like that. This may be the best time to label the point of intersection, which is where it's going to be measured from. So find where the floor on one side of the loop is at the same height as the other, because one side is going down as the other side is going up. So figure out where that is. Sorry, look at the bottom and then label it down here, and try to figure out, well, what's completely opposite of that on the other side, and it's somewhere around here. I'm going to label it on both here, so I'm going to label it there and there. So I put a line in there, and that needs to be labeled POI for point of intersection. So beautiful, beautiful. You also need to label the top of the loop. So the highest point has to be labeled. So put a line in there, and then labeled highest point. See if you can see that. There we go, highest point. Right, the next step is attaching this whole loop with the straight track leading up to it. And we need to mount it in the right spot so that it will give as clean a loop as possible and make this jump as far as possible. So what we're going to do, let me turn it this way, and I'm going to show you how this loop should be pushed up against this beam right here. So that's one thing you need to line up. The end of this loop needs to point towards the catch over here. Move this back far enough so this loop touches. The end needs to be pointed towards the catch, and this needs to be taped in place right here. So I'm going to tape this just in place right here for now. It's basically to hold this piece where I want that to be. And then I'm going to mark with a pencil or a pen where these pieces are going to be touching the ground here. So right there and right here. Alright, I'm just going to move this out of the way for now, because we're going to use a couple of brackets right there. You're going to need a couple small brackets, so we're going to put them in place. I marked off where the outside edge of the bottom part of the loop is going to be. It's the second half of the loop. And I know it's going to be pointing towards this catch over here, so I'm going to tape it down right there. And the other one, move it over here, this is the outside of the beginning of the loop. So I know that this bracket is going to be going right about there. tape that one down as well. I'm going to put the loop back in place. I'm going to tape this bracket to this part of the loop and this bracket over here to the other part of the loop. And this side over here as well. This top part of the loop, we want to keep this from shaking back and forth, so we're going to put another bracket right on this face of the beam. We're going to place it so the sides of the bracket can wrap around the sides of the loop here. So I'm going to put a mark to show where the edge, basically, of the bracket's going to be. Put a piece of tape on the bracket. Slide the bracket in place. Like that. Tape it down. Put tape on the sides of the bracket and the sides of the loop. This is the beginning of the entire track right here, and right now it's too tall. This top of this beam right here is, on my track at least, 49.5 centimeters above the table. So we're going to need to make sure this doesn't extend any higher than that. So you're going to need to trim that. So get yourself level and make sure that it's going to end up being no taller than your structure is. Now, since this is a double layer of track here, you might want to tape them together at the end to hold them so they're sturdy. I'm also going to add one piece of tape on the side away from this column right here. This column is going to help support the one side of the track, but the other side of the track, when you press down on it, it may bend outward. So all I need to do to stop that from happening, I'm going to put a piece of tape on the inside of here and extend it up to the top of my structure, and that will make it so much stronger. If you want to do that on this side as well, you can. I'll wrap it around the outside like this, maybe an even easier way to do it. There you go. Now, you want to be able to have the marble travel as far down here as possible to give it as much speed as possible. But you also need to have a spot where the official starting line is. So we need to label that, and that's going to be basically as high as you can hold a pencil, so it will keep the marble in place without it going down. The marble is allowed to extend above the 50 centimeter height limit, but the track may not. So we're going to figure out where that spot's going to be. To figure out where you're going to put the starting line, you want to be able to hold the marble as high up on the track as possible to give it as much speed as possible, and figure out where you can put a pencil as high as possible so that you don't actually knock out the marble, but when you pull it away, the marble will be able to fall as far as possible. And that is where you want to put the starting line. The pencil needs to be on the starting line, so figure out where that line is going to be and put a line there and call that start line. And here's a closer up view of my start line. When I test out my roller coaster, the jump is consistently making the marble land far enough back on this catch here that I can trim off some of the front of this to get a longer gap score. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Then you'll need to label the end of the gap right here. So I'm going to put an arrow pointing towards the end of the gap and label it gap. Doesn't need to look beautiful as long as it's readable. The rules state that the end of the gap needs to be at least 5 millimeters or half centimeter above any other part. If I were to cut it all the way back to here, say my marble was any way back here and I wanted to cut it shorter, there's two reasons not to do that. One, they would just measure it to this beam anyway. And secondly, the gap needs to be at least 10 centimeters from the beginning of any turn or wall. And if you cut back too far, that distance may be less than 10 centimeters and you may not get the gap counted at all. We're going to strengthen the loop so that the marble doesn't change the shape of the loop and get stuck in the loop. To do that, we're going to use these two strips that you saved from earlier. This is from the really thick paper that was used to make the loop. And what we're going to do is measure off basically how long a strip we want, and we're going to put it across here and measure how much I want to. I'm just going to put a line on there to know where to cut. So I'm basically measuring from the outside of this edge here to the outside of this edge over here. And I'm going to tape this in place. And of course I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So measure how long it needs to be. I'm just going to cut right here. Stop it, cat. I'm going to cut right here. Stop it. Yeah. And stop. I'm going to cut it right here and tape it across here. Alright, this will make the whole loop much stronger. As the marble goes through it, it will wiggle less, and hopefully it should work a bit better. To adjust the time that the marble spends in a half pipe, we can add a half pipe block which will prevent the marble from rolling back and forth as far. So if you're aiming for a short time, like if you're assigned 30 or 35 seconds, you'll definitely need to use one of these to shorten the amount of time that the marble spends in one or possibly both of the half pipes. So to use one of these, you're going to trace along the dotted lines, cut around the outside edge, next we're going to fold these long lines here as mountain folds. And we're going to overlap the outermost two. It doesn't matter which one's on top really. I'm just going to put this one on top here. And you're going to tape along this edge right here. These small flaps here, these are going to be valley folds. They're going to fold out like this. And you're going to lift up this large triangular flap at the end. It's not quite a triangle, but close to it. And I'm going to tape this down just like that. And the same at the other end. These little triangles are going to fold outward. And I'm going to tape it to this large trapezoid shape. This half pipe block should fit snugly inside your half pipe, and you can adjust it. The further you lower this down, the less time that the marble will spend in this half pipe. If necessary, you might want to use a paper clip. A paper clip can go over the end and hold on to this big tab right here. You can use the numbers on the side to figure out where you want to place this block so that it spends either a lot of time in here or basically very little time. So if I lower this all the way to spot 1, as the marble drops in here, it'll go almost straight out.